Okay, recordings started already. Mike, great to have you here.
Lovely. Should I jump in, Christine?
You jump in, and because the first slide I think is something where we both say something, and afterwards I'm handing everything over to you. Okay?
Perfect. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks a lot for coming along on a Tuesday evening to think a little bit about how to motivate and engage your learners, specifically in an online environment and in online teaching. So that's what we'll be doing for the next hour or so. Just to give you a quick intro to who you have here. I'm Mike Hogan. I'm a coach, a trainer, a consultant, a teacher trainer. I've been involved in ELT for almost 20 years. And as Christina mentioned, I've been involved in writing a number of course books for Corneliusson, specifically around business English and teaching adults, although I have also been involved in teaching young learners and other content as well in the past. And so in a moment, I'm going to ask you a little bit about your context, so then I can adapt what I'm saying, how I'm saying, to kind of be relevant to you, also combining with what I've done as well myself. Christine, would you like to say something about yourself? Christine is here helping and supporting today and doing a great job.
Yes, it goes today. And I'm a consultant, sales consultant for the south of Germany and Austria and South Tyrol. So special welcome to all in the south and in Austria and South Tyrol. You see my email address here. If you have any questions, I'm going to repeat my email address frequently in the chat. I can do this actually because okay, right. And if you have any questions according to the books, as Mike is going to say something about our books as well, just email me, okay? Okay, I think then I hand over to Mike and I'll switch off my camera so that the connection is better. And I'll see you later.
Great. Lovely. Thanks a lot, Christine. And you can see my email address there as well in case anyone has any questions for me or any follow-up that they'd like to make after today's webinar. So, before we kick in, thinking about motivation, motivating your learners, thinking about the context of teaching and of our lives these days and of how busy everyone seems to be and busier than we were the year before and 5 years before and things like that, is a nice strategy or method that I saw in a workshop last year to help focus your learners, to help them kind of move aside from the stresses and the strains of the day that they've just had. Maybe they arrived a bit late, maybe they've been stressed, stuck in traffic, maybe they had a tough day at work, maybe you have experienced all of these things today. And so I'm going to do a very quick exercise with us to just try and get us here and now, so that we can think about why we're here and what we hope to get out of the next hour. What I have here is one of these singing bowls, which is exactly that one. Here it is here. I'm going to do a very quick exercise with you. I'd like you to close your eyes. I'm going to hit the bowl with the stick. And I'd like you to close your eyes and just listen to the sound of the bowl. And keep listening until the sound has stopped, until you personally can no longer hear it. And then I want you to open your eyes. You may open your eyes sooner or later than other people that are here, but that's okay, because people hear things in different ways. But let's just all take a moment, focus on the sound, and listen to it, okay? Okay, I'm going to assume that no one still has their eyes closed and that you've all heard it until the end. I realize I've got these on, so I might have stopped hearing it a little sooner than you. But this is just a nice little technique to just take a moment and get people switched on and focused on why we're here. This obviously connects with motivation as well, because if people are distracted, if they're stressed, if they're tired, this is all going to affect their engagement within the lesson that you're trying to run yourself as well anyway. So what are we going to do for the next 45 minutes or so? Going to think about motivation. What exactly is motivation when it comes to learning, language learning? How should you bear it in mind when thinking about planning your courses and your lessons? And then I'll give you some activity examples from the materials that I've been involved in writing with Cornelissen. Although if you don't have these books or they are less relevant for your particular students, don't worry, because all the ideas that I'm going to give you are hopefully easily applicable to your own learning context, and I'm going to show you some online resources as well that you can use even if you don't have these materials. So before we dive in, I would love to know a little bit about you and your teaching context. So I'm just going to open up a quick poll for you here. Click as many as apply to you. So it's not just a multiple choice, it's a multiple answer as well. Tell me about your teaching context. So you might be involved in more than one of these teaching contexts, but it's good to just give me an idea of kind of where you're coming from and what your context is. I will also do my best to keep an eye on the chat field as we go through this webinar. If you do have any questions for me, please post them there. If I miss them, hopefully Christine will pick them up. And at the end, we'll have a couple of moments to have a look through them as well. Someone has already asked me that they missed last week's webinar because this is one of a series of 4. This is number 2. The recording link, I believe, is not yet available for last week's one. I was told it would take around about 2 weeks, but it should then appear on the Cornelissen Verlag YouTube channel. So please keep an eye out for it there. I'll show you what that looks like a little bit later on as well. So coming into who you are and your teaching context, I can see most of you are in a Volkshochschule teaching context, some private language school, some private students, Berufsschule University, some under 18s, and some other, which could be other. Okay. So I'm quite familiar with a number of those contexts as well. I live in the UK at the moment. I lived and worked in Germany for almost 15 years. So I'm quite familiar with the private language school, the private students, the Volkshochschule, yeah, all of those different contexts really. So let me move that one away quickly. And we'll think a little bit about motivation. A quote from Scott Thornbury. Scott Thornbury wrote a book called An A to Z of ELT, which is a bit like an encyclopedia or dictionary of ELT-related terms and things. And he said, motivation is... I'd like you to have a go. See if you can finish that sentence for me in the chat field. What is motivation when it comes to language learning? What's the definition of it? Motivation is everything. Yes, it is. Interest. It's the key to learning, keeping your students going. The ability to stay interested and do more, to be involved. Oh, it's the fuel that drives the learning process. I like that one. Or the engine someone else just wrote as well. It's having fun. Yeah, let's have a look. Let's see what he said. He says, motivation is what drives learners to achieve a goal and a key factor determining success or failure in learning, in language learning. Sorry. So, yeah, interesting. Some of you mentioned engine, some of you mentioned fuel, he mentioned driving. So there's a lot of essence around movement, kind of moving forward. And yeah, it is a key factor which can tip the scale between determining success or failure, definitely, indeed. So let's think about different types of motivation, sources of motivation. We've got intrinsic motivation. This is something which comes from inside the individual. So an intrinsic motivation for learning a language could come from the enjoyment, just the personal enjoyment of being able to do it, being able to communicate with other people, being able to get activities correct, knowing that you are progressing. So it's something which comes from inside us. It's affected and impacted by psychology, well-being, just a sense of feeling good about ourselves. So we've got intrinsic motivation. The other element which often comes with these is extrinsic motivation. What is extrinsic motivation as a source? Have a go on the chat field again for me. A new skateboard, yes. Okay, carrot and stick approach, yes. So, or it could be the teacher, it could be pressure from outside, yeah. So yeah, usually extrinsic motivation is something from outside the individual. So it is maybe the potential of getting a reward of some kind. So maybe it's a new skateboard, maybe it's a new job, maybe it's a pay rise. Or it could also be the desire to become more part of the community of practice. So you'll be better able to communicate with your colleagues, build relationships with your colleagues, to work internationally if your English is better. And so in that context, people will constantly have different varying levels of intrinsic and extrinsic. They will both coexist always, but it's useful to be aware of the differences and to consider, well, which ones might be driving your learners a little bit more. Then we've also got, motivation in general. So not only to do with language learning, and intrinsic and extrinsic, but generally people can be motivated to act or to do something because of the benefit of doing it. Okay, what's in it for me if I put energy and effort into this? If I do A, I might or will get B. So we strive for success, we strive for betterment when we try to learn things. Or the opposite of that is inaction. If I do nothing, something bad will happen, basically. So the fear of inaction, the fear of failure or being blocked by something. So in very rudimentary terms, in the case of our learners, they might be being told, or they might know, if I don't improve my English, I won't get that job, or I won't be able to work on that interesting project, or something like that, or yeah, I won't get that pay rise, for example. So there's action leading to benefit, and there's inaction potentially leading to something negative. So these are also core drivers when it comes to motivation, and this is important. It's an important kind of starting point when we're thinking about what drives our own learners' motivations. And so it's yeah. When I say starting point, at the beginning of every course, I'm assuming that you do a needs analysis with your learners, and so you're kind of thinking about, well, why are they here? Why are they in the course? In the context of business English, it's useful to try and find out what sort of interactions your learners have, now and in the future. So this can help you kind of also understand what sort of motivational forces might be either pushing them forward or pulling them or dragging them forward. So thinking about needs analysis and how important that is as an indicator for what's motivating your learners. And also these days now, thinking about the current working context of your learners. Many of them, if they are working or even studying, they're probably not doing it in a physical face-to-face environment anymore, but they've moved to somehow being virtual or working from home or something like that. And so that is going to change their learning context. It's also going to change their motivational context. And so we need to adapt our needs analyses to not only think of their learning usage and their current needs and their future needs and also their goals, but also to address the context of online, because they might never have learned online before. They may have preconceived ideas of what it means to learn online. And so these can be very useful things to just talk through with your learners, either at the beginning of the course or on an ongoing basis, which I'll touch on later on as well. So even if you're in the middle of a course, you can comfortably dedicate a lesson or part of a lesson to just talking about the experience of learning online, what they feel motivated by, what they potentially feel demotivated by, where their areas of challenge and struggle are, the things they like, the things they enjoy, the extent to which they think learning online is effective or not. And if not, then why not? Because, if we're not discussing these things, then we're making assumptions. And if we're making assumptions, then there's a risk that our assumptions are not correct. So that's kind of from the planning point of view and from the thinking point of view and from the individual point of view. But of course, unless you're doing one-to-one lessons, you don't teach individuals, you teach groups of students. And that's where then it's important to be thinking about the varied levels of motivations that you might have in one single class. And so this is where personas can be very useful and to come into play. A persona is basically a description of either a sample type of student or actually a real student of yours that you have in a class. So imagine you've got Carlos in the class. Carlos loves learning online. He's totally all over it. He's really engaged. He's really motivated. He's always answering questions. He's always involved. He's the first to put up his hand and things like that. So he, on one hand, is brilliant at being engaged and being motivated and, really helps you do your job. But on the other hand, is he dominating the lesson in the class from the others? Anke is a bit hesitant about the whole online thing, very, very happy and very comfortable in the face-to-face lessons, and usually very interactive, very engaging, very keen to learn. But now all of a sudden maybe you're teaching online. So she's a bit hesitant, not about the learning side of things, but maybe more about the tech. Can you hear me? Can you see me okay? Should I say something? Oh, I don't want to say anything. I'm just going to stay back and maybe just kind of be quiet instead. And then we've got Bob, and Bob just thinks online learning is a waste of time. Doesn't believe in it. He's been sent to the course by his boss, who is telling him that he needs to improve his English for his job, and he doesn't even believe that either. So he's kind of got these challenges, not only with why he's there, but also the environment that he's learning in. And you might have all of these people in your lesson. And so this presents a bigger challenge for you. There is no perfect solution to this because every constellation of student persona that you get in a lesson is going to be different. So the key to this is awareness and discussion. Your awareness of their personas, but their own awareness as well. And so discussing topics like these with them can be very useful to just bring any fears or concerns or resistance or skepticism out into the open, on one hand. On the other hand, looking at the needs analyses that I was speaking about earlier, you can get your learners really focusing on, well, why are they there? And what can they benefit from this? What can they get out of this? And even if Bob is skeptical about his need to learn English, someone else seems to think that he does. So maybe that's something you could unpick with him, or maybe he could collect feedback from other people to see if that's a consistent impression about where he might need to improve. And through that, then you can help support with his needs analysis and with his goals. But thinking about planning then, find out why they're there as early as you can in the course. Find out what's driving them, what their interests are, like I was just saying. These open discussions. And understand the importance of both long-term and short-term motivation and how to address them. So earlier on I touched on, intrinsic, extrinsic, being driven from the person. Also the desire to succeed or the fear of failure or something negative happening. And so all of that you can apply into your lesson. And then now you've got another dimension, long-term and short-term motivation, and how to address those with your planning. So in terms of driving that short-term motivation, a couple of key things you need to bear in mind, maybe quick wins, but things you should also always have in the back of your mind. Be very clear about the lesson aims and the outcomes. Like I did with you at the beginning of this hour, I gave you a quick overview of what I'm going to do in this hour so that people know, okay, this is the plan, this is what I'm going to get out of this time investment, and also maybe if this environment is challenging for me as a learner, is it going to be worth the effort? So be clear about the lesson aims and the outcomes. Challenge students to actually think. Don't allow them to be passive. Don't allow them to sit back and just listen or watch. Now, this isn't an actual lesson, and there's very many more of you here than there would be if it were a lesson. But if it were a lesson and there were less of you here, I'd have your webcams on, I'd have your microphones on, I'd be asking you active questions to kind of get involved in things. Doing more exercises, more polls, whiteboards, things like that. I'd be challenging you to actively get involved, but also to just think. Some of the things I'm going to show you later, I'm going to challenge you to think. Even if we're not interacting, as soon as I ask you to think, your brain is interacting. That's engaging you. That's getting you thinking about something. Creating a need to communicate through debates, through different subjects, discussions, topics, opinions, things like that, scenarios, simulations. So as I touched on last week, the difference between heads up and heads down learning or flipped learning, getting the learners to do the stuff they can do on their own at home before they come to the lesson, so that in the lesson you can make it engaging, you can make it communicative, maximizing participation. Listen well. Now, this is one for you as the teacher. And I don't only mean listen, I mean observe. Be observant as to the interaction patterns of your learners. This can help you take a bit of a temperature check on how your lesson's going, how your activities are going. If people are trailing off, maybe becoming less interested, maybe getting tired, then that should be a massive trigger or even alarm bell for you to switch it up, to do something else, to introduce an energizer, or to switch the exercise, or to cut one short, or to just address it. Say, hey guys, how are you feeling today? I kind of get the feeling that you're a bit low on energy. What's up? And, don't rigidly focus on always and only teaching your plan, your lesson plan. There's a mantra when it comes to learning about teaching or teacher training is don't teach the plan, teach the learners. So if they are a little tired on any given day, or if a particular lesson plan that you've planned isn't exactly going the way you've wanted it to, then pause it and focus on them and their needs. So you'll pick up on this by listening, showing a genuine interest in their opinions, in their ideas. Varying the activities and the input. I touched on that a moment ago. So you'll need to mix things up a little bit so that it's not just always the same format, the same approach, the same types of activities, because even if it's varied, if it's monotonous and always the same, that's going to become a little predictable and maybe a bit boring over time. Who knows? And here's the key: enable them to experience success in every lesson. There's a motivational learning researcher called Zoltan Durnyai, and he's written loads of books around language learning and motivation. But one of the key ones that he wrote is called Motivational Strategies in the Language Teaching Classroom. Now, it's about 20 years old, but it's very, very valid still today. It's got lots of different useful strategies in it, but one of the core ones that I took from it and will always hold from it is learners need to experience success in every lesson. Now, however they experience that is up to you, but through demonstration of progress, through an activity of some kind, through coming to the end of something or achieving a goal or finding a solution or whatever it might be. Someone has asked, can you give tips on how to minimize the participation? I'm assuming that might be if you've got someone like Carlos, our persona, who's really active and eager and always participating and jumping in, then you need to control that the same way you would do in a face-to-face classroom, is by naming the other students that you'd like to contribute so that Carlos doesn't jump in. So you could say, okay, guys, for the next question, I'd like to go to Anke. Anke, can you please answer the next one? That's indirectly going to put the brakes on Carlos a little bit. Or depending on the activities that you set up pair work activities or small group activities so that can minimize the risk of that individual dominating your lesson. Or if needs be, have a word with them about it, maybe after class, to give the others a chance to participate. Because people who dominate don't necessarily mean to, and they maybe, they maybe feel good about demonstrating their knowledge and ability to others, but that might sometimes come at the risk of giving others a chance, for example. Thinking about the long term, so the short term is more about in an individual lesson. Long term is over the span of an actual course. Again, be clear about the aims and the outcomes, and follow up on them. Otherwise, you risk attendance trailing off after a number of weeks. So you got to constantly review them, repeat them, revisit them. Again, vary your content approach, vary your sources. So if you are working with a course book, you don't have to stay in the book the whole time. You can use other sources from the internet or from your students or from your own life or things like that. Regularly check in with them about the course, about your teaching, about their learning. So two-way feedback, discussions, or maybe quick surveys or quizzes. You could use like a tool like Mentimeter or Kahoot or Quizlet to do quick surveys with them on how they're feeling about the course, how they're feeling about learning, to see what's motivating them most and maybe what's potentially demotivating them, so that you can adapt. If you're not regularly checking in, you've got a blind spot. And if you've got a blind spot, you're making assumptions, and there's lots of risk there that you need to be aware of, basically. Give time and attention to the group dynamics and how online learning is actually going. So not only focusing on the content, but also on the dynamics of communication and how the learning experience is. So not only the learning output and results and outcomes, but the actual experience of learning. We really need to think about. And again, enable them to experience success and also progress and demonstrate that to them. Next week's webinar is going to be specifically about demonstrating success and progress. So I'll give you some more specific ideas in there on that as well. But it's important when we're thinking about motivation. We've got short term and we've got long term. Before I mentioned we've got intrinsic, extrinsic, we've got the benefit of success or the fear of something negative or failure happening. So these are all the things we need to bear in mind. We need to think about how we conduct our needs analyses and what info we get from our learners about what drives them. And we also need to think about our student personas and how multiple and varied personas can also impact the dynamics in our actual virtual classroom. So moving on, a couple of activities. I think the key to keeping people motivated in learning is if the content is relevant, if it is practical in terms of, yes, I can use this next week, or I can use it in my English, or I can use it in my job, and if it's interesting, as opposed to boring or not interesting. So it's a big claim, but I think if you kind of just keep these couple of simple ideas in the back of your mind, they can help you identify and use activities which are more likely to be a hit than a flop. Christina mentioned I've been involved in writing a number of books with Cornelissen, the Business English for Beginners or Basis for Business series. The books are there, the ISBNs are there if you want to check them out on the website. And I'm also going to give you a link a little bit later on to a subsection of the YouTube channel which has a playlist for some of the content from these books, which is freely available online as well. So I'm going to show you some of that now in a moment. But a couple of examples. Where's my little Zeiger gone to? There we go. Up here. Relevant and timely. So if you've got relevant, you know, and timely. So here's something about work-life balance. Getting the balance right, about balancing well-being and hours worked and things like that. And this concept, this content here just seems to be perfectly adaptable for the working from home world that many people find themselves in these days. I speak to many people who say that it is a challenge working from home because you get up, you get out of bed, and you kind of go straight to work. You've got no commute. And the same at the end of your day as well. And maybe you work through lunch, you don't take enough of a break, you don't get out during the day for a bit of a walk, you end the day feeling tired already and can't kind of motivate yourself to maybe do some exercise or more in the evenings. I'm kind of speaking about myself here as well. But it is definitely a challenge. Someone said to me, they saw a tweet or something on Instagram recently that we don't work from home these days, we live and work. I mean, that wasn't a particularly motivating thing to hear, but maybe it wasn't far off the truth. But here's an example just of a subject or a topic that you can take from an existing course book that you have and try and adapt it to make it more relevant and timely to the situation your learners are in right now. And if they're experiencing that right now, they're more likely to be engaged, they're more likely to be motivated to actually discuss their feelings, their experiences, and what's going on. Someone's mentioned it's almost impossible to motivate virtual lectures at university with over 100 students. Do you have any tips? About half of them don't pay attention. How have I seen this done in other places before? It depends on how you structure the content of your lectures. Is there the opportunity to deliver some of the learning content in advance? So using a so-called flipped learning approach, which I believe may have been driven or started by a university context anyway, out of America, whereby you can give the learning content to the students in advance via, for example, pre-recorded videos. So then when they actually, or pre-recorded lectures, so when they actually come into the live lecture environment, you can use breakout rooms in your live lessons to actually get them discussing the learning content through case studies, through simulations, through activities, stuff like that. So rather than focusing on input and learning, you're focusing on output and actually molding and working with whatever it is that they have learned. So that's one way that you could do it, also with quite large groups. Someone's asked, do the book specifically B1 focus on email writing and telephoning? Yeah, there's loads of that in there, and that's what people need to do these days. A lot of is email writing and telephoning. There's also a business correspondence file at the back of the page. But yeah, the books focus on the core skills that people need to work through English in. But moving on. Key skills development. So thinking about activities that you do with your learners, which are actually going to develop their core and their key skills. For example, in one of the books, actually not in one of the books, in B1 and B2, we've got a feature called Business Life, in which we interview real, live, Googleable business people that you can find on Sing or on LinkedIn. They're not actors and they haven't been scripted. They're real people. This particular guy here, Ronan, he's a personal friend of mine. Works in Switzerland. And he's a project manager, so he needs to influence lots of people as part of his role. So I interviewed him and asked him, about who he has to influence and how he does that and what's important when it comes to influencing. And so that's a video. That's also a different media. So if you were to show your learners a video in the lesson, you'd be kind of mixing up the content a bit for them, which can also help, vary things and their engagement. And then to make it real for them, make it applicable, make it practical and useful for them, you then get them to actually do a role play or a simulation of a situation in which they need to influence maybe a leader, because that's what he speaks about, or a team member or a customer. He speaks about different types of people you need to influence. And the way we've set these up as well is that we've set them up as either a role play So if the learners don't have a specific context in which they would like to imagine having to influence a specific person, then they can actually just get roles instead that we've provided for them, and they can play those roles and act out a particular scenario. So that's the option one. It's role plays. Option two is the simulation, where you use your own work situation or your own ideas. And here's a kind of a guided process to bring them through the simulation element of it, just based around three key questions. What's the situation? Who's involved? And which vocabulary or phrases are you going to need? So, you know, even if you don't work with these books, this is a really easy, simple activity type for you to set up with your learners, which can be both relevant, well, it can be relevant, it can be motivating, it can be varied content. You can interview your friends using your own phone and share the video that way. I'm sure you've got lots of friends who have jobs that aren't teachers, and they have lots of experiences in their world of work. And then you can apply that back to your learners. And if they do have a work context or work experience to apply it into, they can do a simulation. If they don't, you can provide them with a role play. So at the very most, you might have to write a couple of roles for them, or just go out and buy one of these books. Yeah, that idea was born out of me trying to write content for the books, and I was thinking, well, why make things up when I can go ask the guys who actually do this as a living, who influence people every day, or who run meetings every day, or whatever it might be. Another topic: current affairs. So this is, I suppose, this has been becoming increasingly relevant, diversity in the workplace, over the last 10 or 20 years, but even more specifically in the last month or so, when we're thinking about the Black Lives Matter protests and movements, and the atrocities that have been happening to people in minority groups in different parts of the world. And so actually addressing diversity in the workplace is a very relevant subject, specifically these days. And so what we've done is we've come up with some infographics, which are in the books, which actually kind of talk through what learners' interpretations are of actually what does diversity mean? What does diversity mean in the workplace? How much is conformity an issue, a challenge, or a problem? We can have diversity of thinking just in terms of looking at exactly the same thing but seeing it in different ways because people think differently. We can have diversity of faith, religion, gender identity. These are all subjects that we very purposely addressed in the book. I haven't seen them addressed in any other book before, being perfectly honest with you, because many publishers are afraid to touch a subject like this. And that's one of the cool things about working with Corneliusson, is they're very open to making relevant content current and up to date. So what we did is, we made some videos. I'll show you the beginning of the video just to give you a feel for it. But there's an app that comes with the book. There we go. There's the image for the app. The app is called Page Player. And when people buy the book, they get a code that they can use in the app. And then all the learners, the students, can get all the listening activities from the books and also all the videos that come with the books in the apps. So this means that they can also learn at home autonomously, which can also further drive motivation and engagement, because the teacher doesn't own the listening or the videos or things like that, like on a CD or a DVD, but we made an active decision to give them to everyone who has the book. So to give you a quick idea of what that is like, let me just jump straight in. Here we go. Oops. I'll give you a look at the video.
Watch and Talk 2. Diversity in the workplace. There are many benefits in the workplace when people are alike, think the same way, and do things in the same way. It can make it easier to set rules and processes and reduce the chances of misunderstandings or conflict. However, conformity is not always a good thing. If everyone's the same and thinks the same, there is the risk that mistakes are made together as a group, or that innovation is very slow, or perhaps too fast. It is for these reasons that we need greater levels of diversity in the workplace. People who are different from us may see the world differently from how we do. And yes, that might mean we and our way of doing things are challenged more. Diversity challenges our sense of norm. But it can also mean that we have the opportunity to learn more from each other and succeed together. Examples of diversity could be race and faith, gender and mobility, nationality and age. There are, of course, many more examples. You only have to look around your office. Diversity management is the formal process of managing the levels of diversity in the workplace.
Okay, so that gives you an idea for the video and kind of the activity that you could do with your learners. So the idea, being a typical before you watch task is to talk and think about what diversity means to you and in your workplace. While you watch is to think about some specific questions about the benefits of having diversity in the workplace, or diversity management, which was the point that was being touched on there when I paused the video. And then as a kind of a follow-up activity, here we go. There are kind of a personalization element to get the learners thinking about, well, how does this apply to me in my workplace and my context? And then actually thinking about some opinions that people might have about diversity. And they are not necessarily good or bad opinions. They're just things to be discussed in your group. Again, triggering your learners being active, pushing them to communicate more actively. Someone has said they couldn't see any video. Can I just quickly check? Did the rest of you see the video?
That sometimes happen if you don't install the app. If you only join a browser. But since the whole session is going to be recorded, I think you have the chance to see it later on in the YouTube. Okay?
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Christina. That's really helpful to know as well. Yeah. So when it comes up online, you'll be able to catch up on the video. So that's just one example of, again, picking topics from current affairs and applying them back into your lesson will make them more relevant, more timely for your learners. They're more likely to want to get involved and be motivated to discuss certain topics that they have opinions on. So another thing that we did, kind of building on the one that I showed you before about influencing, we've got a bunch of different people in the books, both the B1, B2 and the forthcoming C1 level, just interviewing people about, everyday common scenarios relating to business, things that they specifically work in their own working lives. We've got Chia, who's a communication intercultural skills trainer, speaking about building relationships and kind of how to do that and how important it is. Rhiannon is a business analyst from Hamburg. She's speaking about data visualization. Danny's an investor consultant from Berlin. He's speaking about delegating. And some of these are also freely available on YouTube, on the Cornelissen YouTube channel. You can either just go to Cornelissen Verlag, and if you go to playlists, there's one there for business English. There's a number of videos in there. They are the animated infographics. They're also some of these talking head interviews. That's a link to the playlist there, but it is pretty long. So the easier way could be to try and just find it in the Cornelissen Verlag page. To give you an example of what they're like, is it's a talking head video, but the learners are guided by what's being saying, also with animations, so it makes it a little easier to follow, a little easier to understand for them. I'll give you a quick example of the one with Danny, because that's also the one that you can get from YouTube as well. Whether you use the books or not, you can use that lesson tomorrow in your lessons if you like. So here it comes, and Yeah, we don't need to watch it all, but I'll give you the first kind of 30, 40 seconds to give you an idea of what it's like.
Deciding what to delegate and who to delegate to is a difficult task for a team leader because it involves relinquishing control. A good team leader I had once said to me that my job is to ensure that my employees make my role redundant. And what he meant by that is that the more he delegates, or the more you delegate, the more efficient you can be, and the more empowered your employees will feel. Good delegation means that as a leader, you have more time to check the details and more time to examine problems as they arise. And these are very time-consuming aspects of a role that are often underestimated by leaders.
Okay, so that gives you a quick example, quick idea. It's a short video, it's only 2 minutes long, and you can break it down with your learners. You can watch segments of it. You can kind of discuss and analyze the different elements that he mentioned about the importance of delegating, the different tips that he gave. You know, your learners can use it if they're in a situation where they need to delegate, or if they are being delegated to kind of better understand how that can work kind of most efficiently or more efficiently. Again, if anybody was unable to see the video, you will be able to pick it up from the recording, although that won't be available for maybe 2 weeks or so. In the meantime, you can just go straight onto the YouTube channel and check it out after this webinar, and then use it tomorrow in your lessons if you like. So, moving on. Yes, the sweet taste of success. So again, this is the kind of the mantra that I came back to before as well. Key element with motivating your learners is to enable them, or to set up situations in which they will experience success in every lesson and throughout the whole course. And one of the ways to do this with them is not only to enable them to experience it, but to push them to reflect on it as well, to identify that success, to note the success down. And so, for example, through identifying what their key takeaways are from your course, and I don't mean at the end of the course, I mean as you go through, you know, either every lesson, what are your key takeaways from this lesson? Or maybe after every 3 or 4 lessons, you do a review. What are your key takeaways? And also being outcome driven, because ultimately people are learning the language for a reason. Okay, even those who have the intrinsic motivation, people want to be able to now know, what can I do now that I couldn't do before? And so helping them identify that in very clear terms, what can I do now, is a really good way for them to tangibly and physically tick box the progress that they've been making, and that will have great effects on their motivation and also on their engagement, because they can see that it's paying off. Now the downside to that is if they don't have many things to tick, then that is also a red flag for you, gives you a signal as to a need to perhaps adapt your course, or to have an individual discussion with your learner to try and identify a little bit more about where their areas of challenge might be coming from and how you might be able to adapt to them. And so I suppose that brings me to the last point I wanted to make, is dealing with a drop in motivation, because that can happen. I've chosen this picture because just like a river is the same river in the same position, let's say in the same seat in your lesson every week, every day, has the same name, is in the same place, a river is also different every day, every week, every minute of every day. And so you can't assume that your motivated learners are always going to stay motivated. Equally, you can't assume that your less motivated ones are not going to find motivation from within them and boost themselves up. So if you've got a drop in motivation, how do you deal with it? Any suggestions? How do you deal with a drop in motivation? Want to throw any ideas? Mer av det teilnehmer geben ein. Give them a coffee break, yeah. Change the activity or the topic. Reassess what they really need. Change the phase. Use a new book. Change the pace. Ask questions. What's changed? Yeah, good. Identify it. Say, look, hey guys, I'm sensing that you're not really with it this week. or at the moment. I've identified a bit of a change in your motivation. What has changed? Change the momentum, games, questionnaires, talk about it. Yeah, play some games, use Kahoot. So yeah, so again, much like planning a lesson and bearing motivation in mind, you need to think about the short term and the long term. It's the same with dealing with a drop in motivation. If you've got a drop in the short term within a lesson, there's a couple of quick things you can do. Yeah, change the activity, introduce an energizer, do something fun, get them standing up, whatever it might be, switch of focus. If you are noticing a change in motivation in the longer term, then maybe there is more of a systemic issue at play, and this is definitely worth talking about with them. Actually discuss it with them, or create some kind of a poll, maybe using Kahoot or Mentimeter or something like that, in case they might not want to articulate out loud in front of the rest of the group what the issue or issues might be. Good, and then someone's written developing coping strategies. Yes, actually support your learners to develop their own coping strategies for when they feel their motivation is beginning to wane. So whether that's coping with the course in general, or coping with this online working and learning environment, or coping with something else. But yeah, just by talking about it, giving them more control over the scenarios and the tasks that they choose. So that, yeah, I suppose that links in a little bit with the scenario role play idea I was giving earlier on as well. Give them the control to decide which to use, bearing in mind that as the teacher, you've still got the outcome in mind. So with that example about influencing practice I showed you earlier, they're still going to get the practice either way. So the outcome is going to be fairly similar, but they get to choose which route they take to get there. Yeah, developing strategies around resilience as well. Even discussing what is resilience, what does it mean to you? How does challenge affect you? Things like that. Discussing these things with them. So there are lots of different ways you can deal with a drop in motivation. I think a good starting point is to think to yourself, is it short term or is it long term? And then have a couple of strategies ready to go with that. So that, I think, pretty much brings me to the end of where we are today. Quick recap, we've looked at what motivation is from a definitional point of view and the different types of motivation: intrinsic, extrinsic, being motivated to succeed, or motivated to avoid fear or failure or negative consequences. Course planning, lesson planning, both in the short term and in the long term. A number of activity ideas that I've given you from mostly from this book, Basis for Business B1, this one, Basis for Business B2. But focusing around relevance, around timeliness, around interesting content, around practical content that's going to be usable for them, content that's going to energize them, content that is real and not, from fantastical or imagined scenarios, situations, or people, and things that will appeal to their needs and their interests. And we've looked at some ideas for dealing with a drop in motivation. I mentioned before, this is number 2 in a 4 webinar series that I'm running this month. Last week was looking at how to prepare and deliver online lessons. Next week, we're going to look at measuring progress. The week after, we're going to look at keeping learners learning during course-free periods. So, for example, if your course comes to an end at the end of July, how can you keep them learning between then and when the next course begins? So that kind of brings me to the end of the slot. We have a couple of minutes for questions or comments if you have any. I realize some of you may need to go or go and get your dinner or things like that. So if you do have any questions, please post them below. If you don't get to, or I don't get to answer them, you can always contact me via social media here, or via my email address, which was at the beginning, mike.hogan@convergence.international.
Well, thanks a million, Mike. That was great. Thank you all for being here today, or tonight, really, or this evening. Most of us are in Western Europe, Central Europe. So thank you very, very much. And I think we are all looking forward to the next session, next Tuesday. I'm going to stop the recording now. So I wish you all a very, very nice evening, but please stay with us after I've stopped the recording.